And then he got serious, cut number 17.
Place. Last year, I received an invitation to an event that promised to be, quote, an occasion for exclusive deal-making. It said, quote, the opportunities for mutually beneficial economic development between China and our individual states are tremendous, end of quote. Deal-making sounds like it might have come from President Trump, but the invitation was actually from a former governor. I was being invited to the U.S.-China Governors Collaboration Summit. It was an event co-hosted by the National Governors Association and something called the Chinese People's Association for Friendship and Foreign Countries. Sounds pretty harmless. What the invitation did not say is that the group I just mentioned, is the public face of the Chinese Communist Party's official foreign influence agency, the United Front Work Department. Now, I was lucky. I was familiar with that organization from my time as the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, but it got me thinking, how many of you made the link between that group and Chinese Communist Party officials? What if you made a new friend while you were at that event? What if your new friend asked you for introductions to other politically connected and powerful people? What if your new friend offered to invest big money in your state, perhaps in your pension, in industries sensitive to our national security?
Keep going, cut number 18.
These aren't hypotheticals. These scenarios are all too true, and they impact American foreign policy significantly. Indeed, last year, a Chinese government-backed think tank in Beijing produced a report that assessed all 50 of America's governors on their attitudes towards China. They labeled each of you friendly, hardline, or ambiguous. I'll let you decide where you think you belong. Someone in China already has. Many of you, indeed, in that report are referenced by name. So here's the lesson. The lesson is that competition with China is not just a federal issue. It's why I wanted to be here today, Governor Hogan. It's happening in your states with consequences for our foreign policy, for the citizens that reside in your states, and indeed for each of you. And in fact, whether you're viewed by the CCP as friendly or hardline, know that it's working you. Know that it's working the team around you. Competition with China is happening inside of your state, and it affects our capacity to perform America's vital national security functions.
So they got a scouting report on every governor inside the CCP. They probably have a scouting report on Dwayne. They probably just added Hondo days off to it. But the Secretary of State continues to the governor with the historical context for doing business with the PRC. Cut number 19.
I want to set the context today for this topic. At the end of the Cold War, America started to engage with China heavily. It made good sense. We thought that the more we interacted, the more it would become like a liberal democracy, like us here in the United States. It didn't happen. And you all know this. Indeed, under Xi Jinping, the country is moving exactly in the opposite direction. More repression, more unfair competition, more predatory economic practices, indeed a more aggressive military posture as well. But you should know, this doesn't mean we can't do business with China. I had an operation when I ran Century International. We had a small office in Shanghai. We can find places to cooperate when our interests converge. You can see that in the first part of the trade deal that President Trump got done, signed last month. We're happy about that. It was the right thing to do. That was indeed a deal that was good for both the United States and China. And these economic ties are powerful. They're important and good. They're good for your state. They're good for America. Look at the nearly 18 tons of medical supplies the United States just flew to China this past week to help fight the coronavirus. Yesterday, we announced more than $100 million in assistance to China and the countries that are affected by that virus. And on that note, too, I want to take just a moment to note I want to send my condolences to the loved ones of the United States citizen who fell victim to the coronavirus in Wuhan over the last days.
He continued talking about how the competition isn't really on a level playing field with the People's Republic of China when it comes to business. Cut number 20.
But while there are places we can cooperate, we can't ignore China's actions and strategic intentions. If we do, we risk the important components of our relationships that benefit both countries. The Chinese government has been methodical in the way it's analyzed our system, our very open system, one that we're deeply proud of. It's assessed our vulnerabilities, and it's decided to exploit our freedoms to gain advantage over us at the federal level, the state level, and the local level. Last year, I announced that I would give a series of speeches on China, and this is part of that. It's the context in which state and local government officials ought to think about the way they lead with respect to our relationship. It's important. China matters. It's been part of my mission at the State Department to mobilize all parts of the United States government. I was out in Silicon Valley a couple weeks ago to talk to America's leading tech companies about this very set of issues, and I need your help too. What China does in Topeka and Sacramento reverberates in Washington and Beijing and far beyond. Competition with China is happening. It's happening in your state. In fact, I'd be surprised if most of you in the audience have not been lobbied by the Chinese Communist Party directly. Chinese Communist Party friendship organizations like the one that I referenced earlier are in Richmond, Minneapolis, Portland, Jupiter, Florida, and many other cities around the country.
He went on to talk about, meanwhile, at home, the CCP is blocking speech that might otherwise bring this to light. Cut 21.
But sometimes China's activities aren't quite that public, and I want to talk about some of that today. Let me read you an excerpt of a letter from a Chinese diplomat. It was China's consul general in New York, sent a letter last month to the speaker of one of your state legislatures. Here's what the letter said in part. It said, quote, "As we all know, Taiwan is part of China. Avoid engaging in any official contact with Taiwan, including sending congratulatory messages to the electeds, introducing bills and proclamations for the election, sending officials and representatives to attend the inauguration ceremony, and inviting officials in Taiwan to visit the United States." End of quote from the letter. Think about that. You add a diplomat from China assigned here to the United States, a representative of the Chinese Communist Party in the New York City, sending an official letter urging that an American elected official shouldn't exercise his right to freedom of speech. Let that sink in for just a minute. And this isn't a one-off event. It's happening all across the country. Chinese consulates in New York, in Illinois, in Texas, and 2 in California, bound by the diplomatic responsibilities and rights of the Vienna Convention, are very politically active at the state level, as is the embassy right here in Washington, D.C. Maybe some of you have heard about the time when the Chinese consulate paid the UC San Diego students to protest the Dalai Lama. Or last August, when a former governor, Phil Bryant of Mississippi, received a letter from a diplomat in the consul's office in Houston threatening to cancel a Chinese investment if the governor chose to travel to Taiwan. Phil went anyway. Last year, a high school in Chicago disinvited a Taiwanese representative to serve on a climate panel after Chinese pressure. You know, it's one thing to pressure the Secretary of State of the United States of America. It seems quite something else to go after a high school principal. It shows depth. It shows systematization. It shows intent. Chinese Communist Party officials, too, are cultivating relationships with county school board members and local politicians, often through what are known as sister cities programs.
There's more coming, and I will play it for you after the break. I do have to tell you, the President of the United States just tweeted a very provocative tweet. Because of how badly they did with the impeachment hoax, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the very talented, I want Emo and Toby to note for the record, I always say she's very talented, AOC will primary crying Chuck Schumer and win, the president predicts. And Jerry Nadler has a good chance of losing to his far-left primary opponent. It's getting quite interesting, the president adds. Pelosi will lose the House again in all caps. My poll numbers, great. President is really having a victory lap after